To me, data from surveys, interviews, focus groups can really provide opportunities to hear the voice of the people.
Welcome to the Smart Talk series, the show for professionals who want strategies, tips, and real talk about all things PR, marketing, and social media. Your host is Melissa Vela-Williamson, an award-winning, accredited, and nationally recognized PR pro and communication thought leader. And now your host, Melissa Vela-Williamson.
Hello and welcome to the Smart Talk series. I'm Melissa Vela-Williamson. This season, our focus is on cultural strategy. Today, I'm joined by Sahana Mukherjee. Sahana is Associate Director of Race and Ethnicity Research at Pew Research Center. She is an expert on issues of race relations, culture and identity, and immigration in American and Asian contexts. Sahana has published extensively in academic and non-academic outlets and has received multiple research awards from universities and professional societies in recognition of her work. Welcome, Sahana.
Thank you, Melissa.
I'm so glad you're here joining us today. Tell us more about your background and your research focus at Pew.
Well, thanks for having me, Melissa, and thank you for that introduction. So I grew up in India and moved to the US for graduate school and have lived here since. I've always been interested in studying people, particularly how they identify, how they experience and make sense of their personal and social lives. And this led me to pursue a PhD in social and cultural psychology. My personal experience as an immigrant, in combination with my academic training, got me even more interested in studying the role of society and culture in impacting our attitudes and experiences. It's also important for me to study and share what I find in an objective and transparent manner, reflecting where I am now, the core values of Pew Research Center. So at Pew, as you said, I'm the Associate Director for the Race and Ethnicity team, where I focus on issues of race and ethnicity and immigration in the US. We conduct surveys, interviews, focus groups, as well as analyze demographic data to study the diverse, ever-changing racial and ethnic landscape of the US.
The work you all do is so important to our understanding of how to really operate as communicators. I know that I've been championing the use of data and those insights to inspire work for some time now professionally. And I've always felt very confident in looking to the resources at Pew Research Center to really tell me more about not how we as individuals with our own natural preferences and biases think people act, but really to learn how they do operate and act and what their preferences are. So that really goes away from some of what we feel is right to really knowing. And I really appreciate that about Pew, that nonpartisan, right, type of information that you offer that really helps in some ways for me dispel a lot of myths about people. And for those of us who work in public relations, it's really important that we understand people first. So I really am excited to have you on to talk about the new report, which is called "A Majority of Latinas Feel Pressure to Support Their Families or to Succeed at Work." And that just came out. Sahana, can you tell us why and how this report was developed?
So we wanted to ask Hispanic women, what is it like to live in the US today as a Latina? What we know already is that the number of Latina adults have grown 5.6 million since 2010, which is the largest increase of any other female racial or ethnic group in the US. Plus, the vast majority of Latinas, about 77%, are either immigrants themselves or have at least one immigrant parent, which is highlighting the duality of cultures and experiences. So when I say duality of cultures, I mean, for instance, the individualistic cultures that are more kind of prevalent in the US, which emphasize personal goals and successes, compared to more collectivistic relational values, which are more prevalent in Latin American contexts and Mexican contexts, emphasizing duty and obligations. We also know from surveys conducted by others, so this is outside of the Pew Research Center, that during the pandemic, many Latinas left their jobs because of household and childcare responsibilities compared to women overall. And they still continue to spend more time in the household compared to pre-pandemic levels. So against this background of, the immigrant background, what we saw during the pandemic, we conducted this survey in November 2023 and recruited over 5,000 Hispanic adults, including 2,600 Hispanic women. The questions we really wanted to explore here were, how do they navigate family, friends, and relationships? How satisfied are they with their lives? What gives their lives meaning? What brings them joy? What pressures do they face? Note that we recruited our sample through national random sampling of residential addresses. This really ensures that nearly everyone, like all US adults, have an equal and random chance of selection.
I'm already stressed out thinking about answering those kind of questions, because the duality, I think, is something I want to underline for everyone. I often, as I talk about cultural strategy and understanding that in our work as communicators, it's, look, you have to understand what people are living through and experiencing and the pressures that they deal with. And in some ways, it's pressures, and in some ways, it's our own values and beliefs. But how we're brought up as people in families matters. And then how we grow ourselves as an adult matters too. And some of our cultural behaviors may shift as our life evolves, as we get more education, or as if we don't, right? We can kind of change depending on that dynamic. But I think sometimes those dual pressures of what it takes to succeed in the American workplace, and then what it takes to have a successful, quote unquote, successful family within the Latino culture can be quite different, don't always intersect very well. So I appreciate what you all were really thinking about with this report. So what were some of the major findings that you all heard from your respondents?
So interestingly, in line with the duality of values that I spoke about, what we see is that many Latinas face dueling pressures. So about half of Latinas say that they personally feel the pressure to provide for children, and 2/3 of Latinas say that they also feel pressure to succeed in their jobs. Latinas also said that Hispanic women in general in the US are far more likely than Hispanic men to face pressures in the household, whether it's cooking and cleaning, getting married and having children, as well as pressures to be physically attractive, so to be more beautiful and be more pleasant. Interestingly, despite these pressures, we actually see that a large majority of Latinas, so 88%, say that they're at least somewhat satisfied with their family life, and over half are extremely or very satisfied with their family life, with about 80% of Latinas saying that they find joy in spending time with their family or friends. So these key highlights really show how their families are still a source of satisfaction and joy, reflecting that emphasis on family and relational values that you do see as more prevalent in Latin American cultural contexts.
Yeah, and I think that alignment is really helpful for us personally. And I think professionally, I think some of these pressures are there too. I know and I want to honor that, right? Most women deal with a lot of these different pressure points, but I thought it was very interesting in the comparison of, well, if you were, gender played such an important role in this cultural aspect, where if you were a gentleman of the Latino culture, you wouldn't exactly feel the same pressure to be as attractive. And that's how I read the report. So I'll put my own framework around that as I read the insights. I start connecting the dots based on my background and what I do here. And I said, well, that's interesting. We'll say in a PR way, but also that pressure to really succeed in all aspects. And then adding to that, there really is that feeling in the collectivist type culture of sacrifice for women. and family and group harmony above all, which again, personally, especially as we age, I think that helps us be more satisfied that we lived a good life. But professionally, when we have the pressure to produce income, achievements, sometimes it's really misaligned. So I just want to honor that and give that the grace that amongst all that, if you're a Latina like me and you're not feeling quite pleasant, I would say don't worry about that pressure. Put it on when you have to, because that's a whole lot to deal with too. So, well, these life pressures seem to play a really big part, and as I said before, with most women's experience. But was there anything else that you found unique about the pressures Latinas in particular were experiencing?
So certainly to what you mentioned earlier, right, about the gender differences, we do see that Latinas are saying that Hispanic women face more pressures than men, right? Whether it's to be pleasant or be beautiful. What we did see is that our Hispanic men also said that yes, it is the case that Hispanic women feel more pressures about this than, Hispanic men in general. One thing to note is that, some Latinas in the US grew up with these traditional cultural values that could be carried over from Latin American contexts. This we know can produce pressure from family or community to place the needs of others ahead of their own, as you noted earlier, be passive or subordinate to others, or be virtuous or chaste. And these are characteristics related to this concept called Marianismo. At the same time, some Latinas may also feel pressure to achieve success in their own right, in academics or in their career. And because of their immigrant connection, they might experience a duality of individualistic and collectivistic cultures. And what we see in our findings is that differences exist between our US born Latinas and those who were born outside of the US, so the immigrants. The US born Latinas said that they felt more pressure to succeed at work and feel more family pressures as well than immigrant Latinas. They were also far more likely than the immigrant Latinas to say that Hispanic women in general face pressures to do things tied to gender roles. So, for instance, 66% of those who are born in the US say that Hispanic women face pressures to get married and have children compared to a little less than half of immigrant Latinas. US born Latinas are also more likely to say that sexism is a problem in the workplace than our immigrant Latinas. So flipping it, we actually see that Latina immigrants are way more likely than US born Latinas to say that they're happy and more satisfied with their family lives. 50% of the Latina immigrant sample said that they were happy, compared to only a third of US born Latinas. So we see that those who are born here are perhaps more exposed to individualistic values while also balancing these collectivistic values from their Latin American context. And they're the ones who are also feeling more pressures. Similarly, what we also see is that our younger Latinas, so those who are 18 to 29-year-olds, are the ones who are most likely to say that they personally feel pressure, say that Hispanic women in general in the US encounter more pressures, whether it's to be beautiful or to be attractive or be pleasant or be successful. And they're also the ones who are less satisfied and happy than our older Latinas.
Okay, I'm just sitting with that for a second. I mean, that's so much to think about. And what I'm kind of hearing is that as we're acculturated in the US, right? We're not first generation, we're second, third generation. We're born in the US. We are fully kind of immersed in that duality of the American way and our family's way and then our religion's way and all that. It's trying to find our way, I think, is what is probably the most trying for Latinas, from my point of view of being here in the US a few generations in. But I think part of it is that what I've been really digging into, and I love social science, and what I've been digging into too is that there is certainly a difference between that feeling of happiness versus satisfaction. So I think it's really interesting that your research points to, while the happy marks may not be there across the board, there's still a general overall sense of life satisfaction, which means in some ways, right, that work is worth it. So I'd like to point that out too. And I think really that duality can be very dissonant for us. And so I think as professionals, that is something we should consider as we are trying. And so much of our work in public relations is to influence others. It's recruiting them to be volunteers, recruiting them to donate, recruiting them to join our workplace or our workforce. And we have to think about, well, for this population, which is growing the fastest in the US, and Latinos are projected to really be the majority in many cities and states as time goes on in the next few decades, is how can we tailor our communication to kind of honor the value sets that may be a little more additive or complex than maybe some other groups in some ways. So thinking about that. And I want to also underline that term you use, Sahana, which is Marianismo, which I first heard from a professional named Ruby Garcia a few years ago. So thanks, Ruby. She is a Latina who does leadership coaching. And I had never heard the term before, but I had struggled for years in trying to find the right word to describe what I would see from Latinas in particular within my profession and in other professions and family dynamics, friend dynamics, that sense of not being too loud, too much, too boisterous, the pressure to not self-promote, but also knowing you needed to do well professionally or even academically, and that pressure to be virtuous and chaste and sacrifice and others before you, that could certainly be a part that it really is not in alignment, or, as the young folks might say, it doesn't hit right for the US born Latinas who are very aware of that messaging. So that is something that we should definitely consider in terms of working with the Latino population and Latinas in particular, because as you said, even the men pointed out understanding and seeing some of these dynamics at play too. So very good. Well, I appreciate that the report does dig into that life satisfaction, because as we talked about, happiness can be hard to, I would say, pinpoint in different parts of our lives, but that measures fulfillment. And that might be a good or better measurement of well-being for Latinas, since happiness can seem a little seasonal depending on life. So in terms of satisfaction, what area of life are Latinas most satisfied with, and what might need some work?
That's right, Melissa. Happiness is something we ask about, even in this survey. We asked about how happy are they right now, and that is something that could change. But satisfaction, what brings them joy, are questions that get at their evaluation of something that's over a longer period of time. So we ask them, what are their sources of satisfaction? How satisfied are they with these sources? And what brings them joy and fulfillment? We saw that half of Latinas say that they are extremely or very satisfied with their family lives, but a much smaller share say they feel the same way about their social lives, which is about a third. And only 1 in 5 Latinas said that they were satisfied with their personal financial situation. So clearly you see variations in what are the things that they are satisfied with. Some additional context here to perhaps kind of think about that 1 in 5 being happy with their financial situation is that in the same survey, but we reported in a second report, we see that 2/3 of Latinas say that gender pay gap is a big problem for Hispanic women today. And our analysis of demographic data actually show that, yes, there are continued pay gaps between Latina women and Hispanic men and non-Hispanic women. Hispanic women also lag Hispanic men and non-Hispanic women in labor force participation. So they're not working as much in the labor force. We don't know why, but we do know they feel pressures in their family lives. We also know that a lot of them left the labor force during COVID. We also know from demographic data analysis that there are pay gaps. They earn less than Hispanic men. They earn less than non-Hispanic women. So that's just some interesting context to kind of think about when we see their survey results on how only 1 in 5 are satisfied with their personal financial situation. What's interesting is that reflecting their higher levels of satisfaction in their family lives, A majority of Latinas also say that they find joy and fulfillment in spending time with their family or friends. This is about 78%. And again, a lot fewer say the same about their jobs or their careers. Only a third of them say that they get joy and fulfillment in their jobs and careers.
Oh my gosh, if we were on a panel, if you could see my faces, I mean, it would be something to see for sure, because it is so very frustrating. And that's what I really hope this episode will help convey, is that people pick up the report and they go to Pew Research Center and they see the Hispanic and Latino trends resource area and really learn more about the community, even if you're from the community, right? We all think we know, but that's our own individual understanding and lived experiences. But, this data doesn't lie. And I think that what I'm connecting the dots on here with these insights is that part of what Latinas could work on that may help in terms of finding more joy in our work and more satisfaction with what we earn and, our social lives is that we do have to, in some ways, rail against some of the pressures we have within the collectivist culture so that we can be a little more successful and satisfied in our own lives here in the US and what it really takes in this environment. Each environment's different. Each city we live in, each state we live in, each country we live in, right? That what it takes to really do well in that community is going to differ. And we have to tailor our approach that way as individuals, as communicators, obviously the same. But what I would say for Latinas in the profession, because I'm very passionate about this space and I want, while I'm here on this earth, to make a difference and support this work, is that for us to close our own pay gaps and for us to really live our best lives, is we have to really think about what we can do to really fight against Marianismo and not be the martyr and not be the one that sacrifices themselves all the time. I'm a working mother. I understand the constraints and the dynamics that are involved, but I also live a little counterculture to those around me, right? I don't live exactly as my family does and don't always align with what they think I should do or shouldn't do in terms of how ambitious I am and how much I want to be involved in work in my profession. So I would say getting more education and making sure you have those long-term goals in mind, that it does help your family when you are more educated. It does help your family when you apply that education to a profession that you really can contribute to and one that pays good wages or good salary, a good rate for you. And really fighting for that, I think, would be very helpful. So I want to share just a little few pieces of advice there, because I'm actually working on a book to help inspire more Latinas in general, but for sure those to join the public relations profession. So, Sahana, I was telling you before we started recording that I'm working on my second book, and it'll be an anthology about Latinas in public relations. And the point of that is to very clearly invite more Latinas into PR, but then also inspire them to accelerate their career and evolve and get the leadership positions or ask for the raises or ask for the next level of work. Because in some ways, we can feel like we need that permission from our family or our friends or our network. And the data shows, and a lot of lived experience shows, that you may not get what you need in terms of that acknowledgement and validation or encouragement even within the family or group's dynamics, that on the personal side, so that you can professionally achieve what you need to be satisfied and ultimately take care of yourself and your family. So it is a complex dynamic, and I love to go to Pew Research Center to really learn more about how to work with these different nuances of the culture and be strategic about really honoring them, but then also, if we need to, turning the tables on a couple aspects of it. So this is really helpful for us to learn about. Any other insights or points that you'd like to make about the report?
Thank you, Melissa. I'm very much looking forward to reading your book when it comes out. So some interesting findings that I want to also highlight is that we do see that, on one hand, our Latina sample are experiencing this duality of pressures that we've talked about. But we also want to kind of note the fact that we do see differences within our Latinas. So they're not a homogeneous group. So I talked a little bit earlier about the differences between our US born Latinas and those born outside of the US, but we see kind of similar patterns emerging for age. So those who are younger are the ones who say that they're experiencing more pressures. They're also saying that they personally encounter harassment or discrimination in their daily lives. So examples of that can include someone acting like they're not smart enough, or them feeling not safe, or someone passing an uncomfortable comment that is unsolicited. So those are some kinds of additional experiences that our younger Latinas say they face compared to our older Latinas. And they're also the ones who are less satisfied in general, they're less happy. So those are some important kind of nuances to also think about with our data set, to see that on one hand, we see these overwhelming experiences that our Latinas in the US say, but we also see some interesting patterns within and see some differences between these groups.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm hearing from you that the different attributes and where you are in terms of age, gender, acculturation level, all of those are going to shape your experience and the feedback that you all received. And that's really true. I would be sure for most groups across the board. But I think within the Latino community, there's such a human desire to group and categorize people, places, and things that sometimes we don't honor that, this is not a monolithic group, that we're not all the same. And so I appreciate that you point that out very much. Well, Sahana, I love to ask all my guests a question about this concept that I've coined called smart talk. So what does the term smart talk mean to you?
I think for me, it means, smart to me means like informing the public about their attitudes and their experiences and about trends shaping the world. I think data is very important when it comes to discussing public opinion. To me, data from surveys, interviews, focus groups can really provide opportunities to hear the voice of the people, of everyone, of people who you might not typically hear about. And then analysis of demographic data can provide context for people's attitudes and experiences, and also help us understand how the world is changing, thinking about trends. Has there been any change? Or actually, there hasn't been any change. I really believe that good information can help build a better world. So for me, good information is essentially smart talk to me, and it's accurate, objective, transparent, and truly representative of all the voices of people.
That's fantastic. I don't think I could be more honored by an answer, so thank you so much. Well, this has been a truly insightful conversation, Sahana. What's the best way for listeners to connect with either you or Pew Research Center to read this report or other information?
So people can access all of our publications, including this report, at pewresearch.org. People can also sign up for our newsletters on specific topics or themes, or follow us on social. And you can find all that information on how to do so on the website as well. So really, starting with our website is the best first step.
Wonderful. And we'll make sure we have that in our show notes and everywhere we talk about the podcast. So thank you so much. And thank you, Sahana, for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thank you for having me, Melissa. This was great.
Thanks to our listeners for joining me for today's episode. If you like Smart Talk and Strategic Comms, let's collaborate. You can work with me as a trainer, a consultant, or hire my firm, NBW Communications, for strategic comms planning or PR strategy services. My book, Smart Talk, Public Relations Essentials All Pros Should Know, is available on Amazon in print or audio and offers advice, how-to tips, tools, and new PR models so aspiring and practicing pros are equipped for this evolving field. Please follow and rate this podcast if you're a fan, and follow us at MVW to get the latest on trends, trainings, and more. And as always, think smart and communicate smart. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Smart Talk series. If you learned something or enjoyed our conversation, share it on social media or send to a friend. To learn more about this and other communication topics, visit mvw360.com. That's mvw360.com.